Thank you so much for joining us for this session. And really, one of the things we've had lots of requests for in our organisation over the last couple of weeks was to come in and help employees, help teams understand how can they care for their well-being during this very unusual time that we find ourselves in. And one of the things we keep hearing from workplaces is that naturally everybody is feeling a little overwhelmed right now. There's so much uncertainty as to what tomorrow even brings, never mind next week or next month, and a lot of fear, a lot of stress that people are experiencing. And so as we've been playing with ways to support people, we've been trying to look at, well, what are the three most important things that might help people in workplaces right now, whether you're in an employee role, whether you're a team leader, whether you're in HR, and what are the little things that people can be doing each day to really care for their well-being based on everything we've learned over the last 20 years, particularly in the science of positive psychology and neuroscience, which are two of my big passions. I studied the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology at UPenn a little over a decade ago now, and I've been in the fortunate position there since then of working with organisations all over the world, big and small, corporates, not-for-profits, governments, schools, trying to figure out how do we take what the science is learning and make it really practical and actionable for people to apply. And so my personal hope is that you'll come away from this session with at least a few ahas about, oh, that's what I could be doing for me and for others right now, hopefully with some language that might help you as you're supporting others as well during this time. And I want to give you a bit of a toolbox of things that you could use immediately for yourself and for other people as well. And I'll let you know as we get towards the end how you can get more free resources from all of the work that we're already doing in workplaces all over the globe. So to do that, there are really three things I thought we might spend our time together doing today. I want to start off by diving into some of the myths that perhaps make it harder for us to care for well-beings during any time, but particularly moments like this. So I want to make sure we're on the same page when we talk about well-being, when we think about what enables us to be well and why this matters, I think at all times at work, but particularly right now. Then I want to dive into, well then, what are some of the tiny ways we can care for our well-being, particularly when we're up against it as we are currently. And so again, in my experience, honestly, when we get more and more into the science, there's not that many things we don't already know about caring for our well-being. Always remember when I was studying with Professor Martin Seligman, he said, look, a lot of positive psychology you could wrap up as things your grandmother knew. And I don't think he's wrong on that front. But having taught well-being in lots of organisations over the last decade, the number one thing you'll always hear, if you go back after a well-being session and you talk to people, how did you go with all of that? The number one thing they'll tell you is, yeah, I really meant to do that, but I just got too busy. And so one of the benefits perhaps right now for many of us is perhaps we're not quite as busy as we were a few weeks ago, but it's also how do we make behaviour change easier to enact? So I think there's no good having the best wellbeing strategies in the world if you can't actually turn them into behaviours we can do regularly. So the second thing I want to spend a little bit of time with you on is actually how do we change any behaviour, wellbeing in particular in this instance, but behaviour generally. And then the last thing I want to do is leave you with that toolbox for you or for individuals and for teams to be able to use together right now. So why don't we dive in and see how we go? I think right at the outset, it helps to understand why does all of this matter? And one of the things I'm happy to shoot you afterwards, we have a little free business case on wellbeing with lots of the research there. But if we think about wellbeing in its simplest form, as our ability to feel good and to function effectively, it starts to become clear why wellbeing's become of much more interest to workplaces over the last decade, and why right now, when there's so much uncertainty and pressure around us, our ability to continue to feel good in appropriate ways, we'll talk about that in a moment, but most importantly, to keep functioning as well as we can as we try to navigate the many challenges in front of us right now, really is an imperative for every workplace, no matter what field you're in, no matter how big your organisation. We need to understand how do we work with our brains, with our bodies, with each other in ways that brings out the best of us during these times with whatever we have to give, kind of moment to moment. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly finding in our team, you know, some days people are flying along and everything's kind of great. We feel like we're making a difference. We're still doing good work in the world. And other days are really hard right now. And it's just all that we can do, kind of gather up our energy and even show up. And occasionally we're taking duvet days of just going, you know what, for now, I just need to like box it all out and just catch my breath in this. And so when we talk about well-being, I really think this ability to feel good and function effectively as our goal within the context of what we're experiencing is what we really need to understand the value of what we're trying to achieve. I mean, if you just think for yourself, well, when you're feeling good and you're functioning effectively, what impact does that have on the way you show up to work, the amount of energy you bring to it, the way you connect with other people, what you're able to achieve? You probably don't need a business case with a whole lot of statistics backing up the impact that has individually and collectively. And so often when I'm talking to workplaces, I get leaders or employees just to tune in with that. When you feel good and function effectively, what are you able to do? And for most of us, it starts to become a no-brainer about why caring for our well-being is important at any time, and particularly during this time. But again, I'll pop in my details at the end, and that way you can contact me if you want a business case or things like that sent to you. Very happy to share those resources. One of the other things, though, is that I think often we mistake that well-being simply means we're all going to be well, we're all going to be happy, everything's going to be going great because we'll be flourishing, we'll be thriving, we'll be on top of the world. And this is because often in the past, researchers have suggested when we measure well-being, we do so on a single continuum. We think about +10, we're thriving, -10, we're struggling, and everything in between kind of moves us from one to the other. And I think this was very much, it's kind of well-being 1.0 or positive psychology 1.0, an easy way to understand the difference we wanted to try to make as a field. But since that time, we've learned so much more about well-being. And so one of the first things here I want to do is bust this myth that well-being is either something you have or you don't. And to do that, I want to ask you just to check in with yourself for a moment and think about, taking all things together, and maybe let's go the last week, given there's been so much change rather than the last month. So if you took all things together over the last week at work, have you mostly felt like you were really struggling? You were feeling on top of the world? You were not feeling terrible, but you're just getting by? Or that you were living well despite some struggles? And just for you, you don't have to share it with anybody else. Sometimes I find it helpful when I'm doing these kind of gut checks or heart checks, just to put my hand back onto my body so I kind of ground myself. How are you really doing over the last week? We've been asking this question with Dr. Peggy Kern from Melbourne University for the last few years of thousands of workers in all sorts of contexts, all sorts of jobs, industries, countries, education levels, gender, age groups, company sizes, team sizes. And we found this question offers some really powerful insights when it comes to understanding well-being, and some really important language that I think is probably the lowest hanging fruit right now you could reach for when it comes to improving the well-being of people around you in work contexts, probably even outside of work as well, honestly. And so here's what we've found. We talked about that -10 to +10 scale that wellbeing and positive psychology is often spoken about in the past. And the way Dr. Kern and I think about this is our levels of thriving. Are we high in thriving or are we low in thriving? But Professor Corey Keyes at the turn of the century challenged that perhaps wellbeing doesn't exist on a single continuum. He proposed that perhaps we should measure it on 2 continua. And the second continua that he introduced was mental ill health. So his vertical continua was measuring mental health. Am I high or low in mental health? And the horizontal was measuring, am I high or low in mental illness? And what his research found is actually it was possible to be high in mental illness. Perhaps I have a disorder such as bipolar, but also to be high in mental health, that if I'm getting the support I need around managing the challenges of my bipolar, I can actually be living pretty well despite my struggles. If we think about this on a physical dimension, Peggy is an asthmatic, so she can often be high in struggle around managing her physical asthma symptoms. But she's also a very keen runner and cyclist, so she's actually also very high in physical health. She's one of the healthiest people I know when it comes to things like that. And so again, here in a physical dimension is an example of we can be high in struggle and high in thriving. So a couple of years ago, Peggy and I started asking the question that you just answered of all these different groups, and we began to map their outcomes and what impact it was having in a range of factors. We recently were in Australia with 1,000 workers across their workforce, representative of the working population, and we measured in December 2018, and of course since December, Australia unfortunately has experienced huge bushfires, coronavirus, and now economic downturn. And so in the middle of March, just before they closed non-essential businesses, we went back and we measured another 1,000 workers representative of the population. So in December, we found that about 19% of Australian workers were feeling on top of the world, what we call consistently thriving. We found that about 37% were living well despite struggle. So they're high in thriving and they're high in struggle. We found 36% were not feeling bad, but just getting by. So they're low on struggle, but also low on thriving. They're missing the knowledge, tools, and support that might help them be higher up that chart. And we found about 8% were really struggling, high on struggle and also low on thriving, missing the knowledge, tools, and support they might need to be able to navigate those struggles. And we find that this is pretty similar in different populations. We've done this research with 1,000 workers across the US in 2019 and found pretty similar results around these groups. In March, when we went back in Australia, we found, not surprisingly, that the consistently thriving group had gone down significantly to just over 10%. We found that those living well despite struggle, Peggy calls these our most resilient people because they're finding ways to thrive even in the thick of struggle, had actually increased by about 7%. We found our not feeling bad but getting by had gone up by 2%. And interestingly, that our really struggling group had gone down by 1%, perhaps because struggle is relative. And right now, perhaps the things that felt so hard in December didn't quite feel so hard in the context of everything going on in the world. And we'll keep measuring this group in Australia to see what's going on for them. But there are a couple of important things to note here and why struggle isn't an issue in and of itself. We can still be living well despite struggle. So we find that there is no statistical significant differences generally between people in the top of the chart. Our consistently thriving and living well despite struggle groups doing just as well when it comes to their performance at work, for example. They're doing just as well when it comes to their ability to manage their well-being and their motivation levels. They tend to be doing almost as well as each other across many of those domains of relationships, positive emotion, physical health, engagement, accomplishment, sense of meaning and purpose in work as well. And so we see these people getting very similar outcomes, even though they tell us both in that single question and some of the other items we ask that their levels of struggle are quite different between each other. Now, interestingly, what happened in the March data is that our consistently thriving people not just went down overall in number, but those people who were still in this group did start to dip a little on things like performance and in some of those in their ability to care for their well-being. And so one of my colleagues, Danielle, likened it to a little bit like, you know, they were thriving while essentially they were in the backyard swimming pool having to swim, but all of a sudden they've been tossed into the wide ocean and it's a little harder. And so we're seeing a little fragility at the moment in some of the results for these people, which again is kind of interesting for us to think about when it comes to supporting well-being. So the takeaway here that I would love you to have is, if nothing else right now, we normalize struggle as part of caring for our well-being. I think that is a massive gift that we can give to anybody. We have found in other studies that actually when you introduce wellbeing programs into workplaces, those people who are really struggling actually can be negatively impacted by wellbeing programs. And if we think about why this might be, if I'm really struggling to even just get out of bed each day and get to work, and then I get to work and I'm confronted with we're all going to be well, let's do a wellbeing program, it may actually increase my sense of shame and isolation because I already know that I'm not feeling that well right now. And so one of the things about normalizing struggle, particularly at a moment in time like this where so many people are struggling, is that none of us need an extra pressure on top of everything else. And so again, with nothing but good intent, there's a danger when we bring in wellbeing programs at any time, but particularly this time, that we're adding one more thing that people get to beat themselves up about for now not feeling well and what's wrong with me. So my plea is, please support people's well-being, but please help them to understand well-being can comprise both thriving and struggle in and of itself is not a barrier for us having well-being and having great outcomes for ourselves and for others as we go about our work. So this is the number one thing I'd love you to take away. And I love Dr. Kern always talks about the fact that really our goal in trying to help people improve their well-being is to help them become more intelligent and active stewards in shaping their well-being. And so, you know, this isn't a game. We're not going for perfect scores. We don't need to add shame or isolation anymore to what people are going through, but we do need to make it safe to talk about what's working well and where we're struggling. In that Australian data we recently found, only 1 in 10 workers felt it was safe at work to talk about the struggles they might be experiencing. And yet we know being able to have those conversations with each other, one, not only helps us feel more supported and less lonely and isolated, but two, is part of how we learn and grow and become more intelligent in experimenting and finding out, well, what do you do and how does that work? And, oh, you've struggled with that as well. Or maybe it's not me. Maybe there's something else I can try there. And so I think, again, this is the best goal to be working towards rather than trying to either constantly improve people's wellbeing scores or be trying to encourage people to go after some perfect goal of wellbeing that just, it doesn't exist. Wellbeing's meant to ebb and flow depending on what's happening in the world around us. And if we're just constantly going up in wellbeing all the time, I would start to worry that either we're lying to ourselves or we're lying in surveys we're taking, or we've become disconnected from the world around us. So this is number one. And again, I think this is super easy and low-hanging fruit for all of us to do. The second thing that I want to help you to just think a little bit more about, so we're setting you and others up for success, is that most of us find it hard at times to have changed behaviours. We probably have all had experiences where we set out with a new wellbeing goal and then didn't quite work. We gave up after a while. Perhaps we beat ourselves up a bit about that. Why don't I have enough willpower? Why aren't I disciplined enough? Why can't I stick with things? And again, this is another thing that we just don't need to be leaking energy over unnecessarily. The truth is that very few of us have ever been taught the recipe for being able to change behaviours. And I'm a huge fan of the research of Professor B.J. Fogg at Stanford University, who has found in his studies, jump forward, that any behaviour that we manage to enact happens because our motivation, our willingness to try it, our ability, can we actually do it, and some kind of prompt, could be a habit or an environmental nudge, an alarm we've set on our phone, or a friend calls to, you know, get us out to the gym or something like that. But some form of prompt has occurred all at the same moment that nudges us into taking the actions that we need to take. And so what BJ has found in his research is that most of us rely on motivation. We think we'll have enough willpower, self-control, we're going to do it. But motivation tends to ebb and flow also. You know, you wake up one day, you're highly motivated, you're going to be the healthiest person that ever walked the planet. And by, you know, day number 2 or perhaps 5, 7, 10, you know, staying in bed looks much better in the morning than getting out and exercising. So motivation is fickle. It's probably the most unreliable part of this formula, to the extent that what we want to do instead of having have to or should do or expected of us wellbeing goals, is really go after those want to things. What do you already want to do? BJ says we're much more likely to enact behavior change when we're choosing the things we want to do already. Ability comes to, well, can we pull it off? And here BJ's research suggests that for many of us, where we go wrong on this front is we set goals that are just too challenging right out of the gate. And so instead of doing that, BJ suggests we want to shrink the change right down and start tiny. That 30 seconds of taking a wellbeing behavior in the direction of where you want to go is better than no seconds at all. And when I was starting to run initially, and I swore that fun and run did not belong in the same sentence together for most of my life, to bring it down to my ability at that time, initially it was just getting my running shoes on each day, and then I got to declare success. And that probably sounds ridiculous. I'm not getting any fitter just getting my running shoes on. But I can't tell you, I don't think there was more than maybe about one morning where once I got the running shoes on and I could declare success on my behavior change, I didn't then go out and start moving in some form. And bit by bit over time, I started running further and further. And these days, if I don't run, it's actually like an itch I've got to scratch. I really don't feel that good within myself. So ability is about how do we make these behavior changes easy to do, knowing that even a tiny shift is moving us in the right direction. And it's that ability to keep doing a tiny shift consistently that improves our ability over time so we can start tackling harder and harder things around these wellbeing behaviors. And then the last one is a prompt, and I'm going to leave you with a little tip that BJ has around one form of prompt that he loves, which is called a tiny habit. And I'll show you how you can put any of these wellbeing tools I'm about to show you into a tiny 30-second a day habit that you could get teams to start right after this session today if you wanted to. So BJ just makes the point that for most of us, we struggle with behavior change. Often find if you scratch below the surface of the I'm too busy excuse that you get about why people aren't doing the things they know they need to do to care for their well-being, you find the same things that Professor James Prochaska and his colleagues have found in their research around behavior change, which is actually I'm too busy is just a very polite way of saying, I didn't really know how to do it. I didn't really want to do it. It was in conflict with other goals I had, so that motivation really wasn't there. Or I was worried about failing at doing it. And so I'd rather have the hope that one day I'll do it than be living with the failure. And again, that failure is often just that we haven't known how to adjust those components of BJ's formula so that we could feel more confident about being successful at the behavior changes we create. And so BJ had a great book, came out in December, called Tiny Habits. He's got a TED talk on that same topic. There's a podcast on our website with him talking about this research at the end of last year. And I highly recommend, if you haven't played with his work yet, some really great pieces in there on behavior change. Professor James Prochaska, also another great resource in this space. So then what do we do? What can we actually do then to care for our well-being? So Professor Martin Seligman, of course, has suggested that our well-being comprises of 6 pillars. And as I go through this, again, you might want to get your pen and paper out and just see how you're doing. I'm going to share with you a very simple survey that Dr. Peggy Kern has created to step on the PERMAH scale, is what she describes it as, because each of Professor Seligman's pillars forms those letters that make the acronym PERMAH. So Professor Seligman's first recommendation is that we need to have the presence of heartfelt positivity. So again, think about the last week and how you've been doing. And I want you to just think, well, how positive have you felt around your work? And let's use a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 being never, 10 being all the time, and anything in between that you need. So I felt positive at work. Just jot down for yourself, where were you between 0 and 10 over the last week on that scale? Seligman's second pillar is engagement. How do we develop our strengths, the things we're good at and enjoy doing? So here's the question, the statement for you. I was interested and deeply engaged in my work. Where were you between 0, never, 10, all the time? I was interested and deeply engaged in my work. Our next pillar is relationships. Of course, Professor Chris Peterson summarised so beautifully that when it comes to our well-being, more than anything else, the last 20 years of research have taught us that other people matter. So here's the statement for you to score yourself on. I felt respected and appreciated by my co-workers. I felt respected and appreciated by my co-workers. Again, 0 for never, 10 for all of the time. And the next pillar is meaning. Do we feel like what we're doing makes a positive difference for anyone in the world? So here's your statement. I felt that the work I did was valuable and worthwhile. I felt that the work I did was valuable and worthwhile. Again, 0 never, 10 all the time. Our next pillar is accomplishment. Can we achieve the things that matter to us? Do we have the grit and resilience to fall down 7 times and stand up 8 if that's what we've got to do? So here's the statement. I made progress towards reaching my work-related goals. I made progress towards reaching my work-related goals. 0 for never, 10 for all the time. And then our last pillar is health. The eating, moving, sleeping stuff we know is so important. So here's the statement. Physically, I felt strong and healthy. So 0 for never, 10 for all the time. Now, Professor Seligman and our research with Dr. Kern has definitely concurred with this, would suggest that we need a presence of all of these pillars. So if you're finding that some of them are quite a bit lower than others, you might want to think about how important is that pillar for me right now. In most populations, we find generally people tend to sit somewhere between about a 7 and an 8 on a lot of those pillars, but it depends what's happening in your world. Right now, it might be completely normal that some of those things have dipped a little, especially your relationships, if you're not as physically close to your colleagues as you would be normally, for example. We've seen health in that March data come right up for most people because we're all much more mindful right now about caring about our physical health, and we have a bit more time perhaps to do it than what we were struggling with in the past. There's no wrong score. There's a score that's right for you. So I'm a natural introvert. My relationship score often tends to be a little lower, whereas one of my team members, Rachel, is an absolute extrovert, and so hers needs to be quite high in order for her to be well. So again, context matters. We want to be intelligent and active stewards of our well-being. Our goal is not perfect scores of 10s all across, although if that's where you are and that's working for you right now, then that's fantastic. But our goal in being intelligent is to be able to break these factors of well-being apart and see, where am I? Is that serving my well-being well right now? Or is there some change I want to make? Do I need to prioritize perhaps a little bit more in that pillar in order for me to feel good and to function effectively, to be high in those levels of thriving, no matter what struggle I'm facing? And again, I'll leave you with a free resource at the end of this called the PERMAH Wellbeing Survey. It's a free 5-minute survey. It's got more questions than just those simple ones we often use in a workshop like this. And you can go through and get reports and tables and whole lots of interventions and things like that from that tool if you would like, and you're welcome to share it with anybody else. But I want to just spend a last little bit of time together digging in to little suggestions on each of these pillars. And again, I'm going to leave you with a little cheat sheet that you can get of all of these ideas if you're wanting them for yourself or others as well. So let's quickly just kind of step through these pillars and think about it. And when it comes to my well-being, I often like to think about throughout my day, how do I almost play PERMAH bingo? Can I get like a tick for each of the pillars? And in fact, on our fridge downstairs, I've got a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old son, and they've each got their homeschooling sort of schedule up on the fridge on post-it notes, and they are playing PERMAH bingo on there. They have to show before they get their tech at the end of the day that they've managed to tick something in each of these pillars. So I'm going to share how I do this as a bit of a PERMAH bingo day, but I'm also going to touch on some things you can do for teams through each of these as well as we go. And I will send you a little 2-pager at the end if you want to, of lots and lots of ideas you can try in this space. So our positive emotions help to open our minds and make us more receptive, created and connected with each other. Neurologically, they actually create a whole lot of happy chemicals in our brains that help us to see more of what's going on around us. They expand our field of peripheral vision. They help us to be more creative and think outside the box generally. And they help us to feel safer, so we think more about we and a little less about me, because we're not so much in survival mode. And this is the research of a number of people, but in particular, Professor Barbara Fredrickson has published a lot of work on this front. And if you haven't played with her research before and you want more on this, again, I'll give you a link to the podcast we do each week that's free. There's a great podcast up there with Barb where she talks it through. Interestingly, right now, what we saw in that March data is positive emotion is what has dipped the most for many, many workers, and kind of makes sense, right, given all that we're up against. But finding ways for yourself and for others to have a little heartfelt positivity right now is actually really important. The way I think about these positive emotions is that they are the hygiene factors of my well-being. And so if I can find time each day to brush my teeth, I can find time each day for what our colleague Caroline Adams-Miller describes as a jolt of joy. And a jolt of joy is just anything that puts a smile on your face. Could be a favorite song, something funny on YouTube, right? There's a reason cat videos are so popular. Could be an inspirational quote that you love, reading, or somebody that makes you smile when you chat to them. But really try to start your day, just like you brush your teeth at the start of each day, by prioritizing a jolt of joy. So you get a shot of that heartfelt positivity that opens your mind, it opens your heart, so that you've got the energy to play through the day. And in team settings, I think the easiest way to create jolts of joy, even during times like this, is just at the top of any team calls, asking the question, what's working well right now? Even in times where people are truly struggling right now, there will be small things that are still working, and we need to hang on to those things and not lose sight of them amidst all the uncertainty and the anxiety and the fear and the struggle we might be experiencing. Struggle and thriving can exist together, remember. One doesn't negate the other. So in teams, my easy little tip, start the meetings with what's working well, even during this time, and explain why you're doing it. It's not insensitive in any way. It's actually important for us to stay resilient. And by celebrating and recognizing those things that are working well, it helps us to be able to do more of that with each other. The second pillar, of course, was engagement. And so this is around using our strengths, those things we're good at and that we enjoy doing. When we can use our strengths, studies have found it helps to improve our confidence, our resilience, and our well-being. It makes sense, right? You get to do what you're good at each day and that you enjoy, you're going to be more engaged in your work. And so by chance you don't know what your strengths are, or your people don't, I highly recommend the free 10-minute survey at the VIA survey, viasurvey.com website through the VIA Institute. It's a great way to figure out what our strengths are and to have the language of strengths. And then what I try and do when I kind of set up for my morning, I'm a big to-do list person. I try, one of the first things is to turn a morning to-do into a ta-da, I did it, by aligning a strength to a task. So one of my strengths is curiosity, and often in the mornings I'm trying to get curious about what can we do to be of more service in the world. And so I might use that time to read some new research, or catch up on a book, or start another TED talk. I tend to just do it for about 10 minutes because I could spend all day there once I start, so I put the timer on. But this turn a morning to do into a ta-da creates this beautiful positive ripple through our day. So pick a task that you've already got to get done if you can, and then align a strength intentionally to it and see how you go. I find it gets me more into that state of flow where I feel like I'm in the zone, I'm one with the music, I'm doing good things. And when it comes to your team, I love these 3 simple questions that we use. Normally I have a weekly catch up with each of my team members, and I'll ask them, what lit you up last week? What lit you up last week? What did they enjoy doing? Because anything that they really enjoyed, that lit them up, that energized them, one or more of their strengths are going to be in play. And this question makes it super easy for me to understand how are they using their strengths against the jobs that they've got. The second question then I always follow up with is, and what are you looking forward to this week? And I love this question because, again, it helps me learn more about how they align their strengths to tasks. But number two, it also gives me an early warning that if something's that they're not looking forward to this week, but I know they need to get done, it gives us time to have that conversation so I can help them think about, well, how could they bring their strengths to that task? So it might move it up the joy list for them. And then the last question I ask is, and do you need any support? Do you need help from me or anybody else in order to make the best use of your strengths this week? So those three simple questions only takes us about 10, 15 minutes at most to go through. A really easy way for teams to understand how they help each other do more of what they do best. Our third pillar is relationships. And I love this quote from Professor Brené Brown. And I think it's particularly important at this moment in time where everybody's perhaps a little more fragile, a little more frazzled. Frazzled is, what if people are doing the best they can with what they have right now? Of course, our brain is a sense-making machine that's designed to keep us safe. So one of the things our brains are wired to do almost before we even realize it's happened is to jump to judgment about what other people are doing, how other people are feeling, what their intentions are behind those actions. And because we're trying to keep ourselves safe, not because we're bad people necessarily, but we're just trying to stay safe in a big world, we tend to often assume the worst of each other. And I love Professor Gervais Bush describes this as interpersonal mush. I think it's a great technical term, interpersonal mush, because all these assumptions about each other often bogs our relationships down. It causes us to leak energy because instead of showing up with curiosity and generosity, knowing that we're probably each doing the best we can with what we have in this moment, we don't ask those questions of each other. We don't check in. We jump to conclusions about each other. But the reality is, how many of us got out of bed today and went, yep, I'm going to come to work and try to be as disappointing, disruptive as I could be, right? None of us did, right? We got out of bed today and went, I hope I get to go to work, do good things with good people that might make a difference in the world. But we often unintentionally assume that other people definitely got out of bed today trying to make my life as difficult as possible. And so this reminds us that actually the bulk of us, most of the time, we're doing the best we can with what we have right now. And when we start from that place, it helps us to build psychological safety with each other because we're more likely to ask questions and from a place of generous assumptions rather than negative, at least until we have more information to know what's really going on for somebody. So I think this is a great challenge at all times, but particularly at the moment while people are a little more stretched. So over lunch, it's a great time to improve your relationships by chewing on curiosity instead of judgment when it comes to other people's actions. So lunchtime's often, I find, it's a good break for me just to check in. How's my morning gone? Is there anything I'm kind of ruminating over? I got myself in a bit of a knot about something somebody said or did or didn't do. And do I maybe need to get curious instead as I come back from lunch, instead of continuing to leak energy in that space? Cy Wakeman's research of reality leadership has found that most employees leak about 2.5 hours of energy a day going over all this kind of interpersonal mush that goes on with each other. So a lot to be gained, a lot of things to be saved when it comes to our wellbeing and performance on this one. Our next pillar is meaning, and Professor Adam Grant has found that the single strongest predictor of meaningfulness is the belief that our jobs have a positive impact on others. And I think that's particularly true right now. We don't need to be saving the world. We might just need to be making a positive difference for the person in our team or the person that's immediately impacted by the work that we're doing today. So all of us have the capacity to make a positive difference for each other, but sometimes it just means kind of digging below the mundaneness of a task and asking ourselves, well, who does this help and why does it matter for them? We might need to go through those questions a few rounds before we get to oh, okay, that feels like showing up for and putting my best effort in. But again, in my experience, once we scratch the surface of pretty much any task and we think about, okay, well, who does this really help and why does it matter? There is often an opportunity for us to make a positive difference for somebody somewhere. And if there's not, then those are the ones we should go and check in with our bosses on about, why am I doing this again? Because maybe that's not the best use of resource. So instead of reaching for the chocolate at afternoon tea, do something sweet and invest in a 5-minute favour to help out a colleague. This is an idea from Professor Adam Grant in his book, Give and Take. So you could share a piece of research. You could share one of the free handouts I'm going to give you today and say, I went to this crazy workshop. Here were some ideas about our well-being. You could write a note of thanks to somebody. You could introduce two people you know have similar interests that might help each other out on the work that they're doing. You could write a recommendation on LinkedIn or send an email to somebody's boss to thank them for what they've done. All sorts of ways that we could do little favours for each other, and just to know that we're supporting each other, much better than getting a sugar hit at afternoon tea if you can avoid it. Our fifth pillar is accomplishment. And of course, Professor Carol Dweck's research has found that more important than believing in our abilities is the belief that we can improve our abilities. And of course, Carol, well known for her work on growth mindsets. And I was fortunate enough to be backstage with Carol at a conference where we were talking for the Dalai Lama about 8 years ago now. And while we were in the green room together, I was telling her how each night at the dinner table with our kids, we'd sit down and ask them what went well today. And it was so interesting to hear what happened in their day. And Carol was very polite. She said, I think that's a great question, Michelle. She said, but can I suggest you add one more question to your dinner table conversation? I'm like, you're Carol Dweck. Of course you can add one more question. And Carol said, I think you should also ask, and where did you struggle today? She said, when we ask this question, number one, it normalizes struggle that's happening for all of us. And number two, you give people a chance to share their learning and their growth, but also maybe to know where they might need help or encouragement or a sounding board, but that this needs to be part of how we continue to build on our strengths with each other as well. And so over the years, I've played with this as a coaching question for myself, number one, every day, but number two, for teams as well. And so my suggestion is at the end of the day, as you wind down, that you get to take a little victory lap and reflect on what went well, where did you struggle, and most importantly, I've learned over time to add, and what did you learn? Because the reality is that most of those outcomes we work so hard for every day are pretty short-lived. If you think back to even 3 months ago and the outcomes you were working so hard to achieve, I'm going to take a safe bet that there's a lot of them you've completely forgotten. And yet what continues forward with you is the learning you got from those experiences, because that's what you keep building on and taking to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So unfortunately, often at an early age, our brains become outcome obsessed because we get praise and recognition. So we get dopamine and lovely feel-good chemicals. And as a result, we start to fear failure. And of course, if we're really going to be growth mindsets, we want to be able to embrace both success and failure. And so I find these questions such an easy way. Again, I do it for myself at the end of the day, but we do it in our teams at the end of projects we're implementing. Often on a Friday, we're all virtual, so we're just in a chat room and we'll reflect on these things. But what went well? Where did we struggle? Knowing that we are all perfectly imperfect and struggle is part of the way that we learn and grow. And then most importantly, what did we learn? And often we'll also ask, well, what are you going to do with that next week? So little victory laps, I think we all need more of them. And then our last pillar, of course, is health. And here, of course, the work of Tom Rath has found that small choices about how we eat, move and sleep each day count more than we think. And if you haven't read Tom's book, Eat, Move, Sleep, I highly recommend it. And if you Google it, he's got a great website where you can get a free 30-day plan tailored for you of all sorts of little tiny things that you can do if this is one that you or other people are particularly struggling with right now. And so as you cook a nutritious dinner, rather than kind of slumping on the couch as soon as you're done, or perhaps during the process of the cooking, try to keep moving, stretch, strengthen, dance, whatever it is that works for you while that meal's being prepared. Next to our stove, I have a Pilates ring, like just it's a tension band. And so while things are boiling or that, I use it for, you know, a few arm moves, a few leg thigh squeezes and the like. It's amazing actually how much exercise you can get done while things are on the stove, or I'm waiting for the kettle to boil, or things like that. So just think about what are the little ways that we can keep moving throughout the day, particularly right now where a lot of our movement has been dramatically reduced. Can be a really great way just to keep up those health pillars for us. So these were tiny things that we could do. The other thing I will say on health is walking meetings right now, where teams are in a position to be able to do it. So walk and talk, particularly with one-on-one catch-ups, so that can be another great way just to keep the exercise part of this all going. So that takes us through each of these PERMAH pillars. And again, if you want it, I'm going to pop my email in a second. You can email me. We'll send you a free, like, one pager, 3 ideas for each of the pillars, 1 page just on self and another whole page on teams with lots of ideas that you can pull there. But what I want to leave you with is just this hint from Professor BJ Fogg around the prompts. How could we create easy prompts? The goal of those little things is to make ability easy. And then you just choose the ones that you might want, that you want to do rather than have to do. But how do we put it together into a prompt? And I mentioned BJ suggests creating tiny habits that we can do at least once a day, takes less than 30 seconds, and requires minimal effort, so easy on the ability front. And he has this tiny habit recipe. And again, if you want, I'll send it to you, but I highly recommend his book called Tiny Habits. And he does have a free Tiny Habit 5-day program you can do on his website. If you put Tiny Habit BJ Fogg, it'll pop straight up in Google. And so BJ suggests that the easiest way to get habits going is to anchor them to other habits you have. So after I, for example, walk into the kitchen, or after I turn on my computer, or after I eat my lunch, after I finish my coffee, after I pack up for the day, after I turn on the stove, right? Your day's already full of lots of little habit anchors. And so attaching it to one makes it a little easy to seamlessly flow from one into the other. Then the I will is the tiny behavior, like put on my running shoes and then I got to declare success, or I will ask what went well, or I will do a 5-minute favor for one person. It's a bit more than 30 seconds, but 5 minutes, you know, depends again where your ability level is at. So I will, and BJ separates these into 2 options. One's a starter step. So just putting my running shoes on, that was a starter step. Yep, didn't have to go any further. And I could say I was done because that matched my ability for being able to run at that time. But if that doesn't feel meaningful enough, it's like, nah, I got more in me than that. I'm ready to go bigger. Then he suggests just remember to keep it small. So a 5-minute favor is great. Yeah, a 5-minute reflection as you do your victory lap. What went well? Where did I struggle? What did I learn today? These don't have to be big things. And again, on the little handout, if you want to email me, I'll pop it in a second that you can get. You'll find we tried to put lots of little things that could be done virtually at the moment, knowing that lots of us are in very strange working situations. Now, here's the last tip. Most importantly, you need to celebrate at the end. So in my office, I'm frequently with my team running victory laps, which, yes, looks absolutely crazy. But you know what? The craziness of it makes me laugh every time, and it makes us laugh at each other. It stimulates positive emotions. I get to tick another PERMAH thing off my list, and it helps create that positive memory of having done my habit. So the next time my anchor moment arrives, I'm more likely to want to do it again. Now, there's a lot of research coming out of the field of habits over the last few years from different researchers that is suggesting it's not willpower, it's not even repetition that builds habits, it is emotion. And particularly intensely positive emotion. So whatever works for you in terms of celebration, it could be a high five, it could be the shirt over the head, it could be the victory lap, it could be a pat on the back, it could be a tick off the list, it could be a silent good job that you say internally. Whatever works, just make sure if you're using this approach, you celebrate at the end. And again, if you're wanting tips on all different sorts of celebration stuff, 1, BJ's book has a lot of that, but 2, I'm going to stick my email in there now, and you can email me with any requests for these things. So a couple of things I've offered for you. One is send me the PERMAH toolbox, please, and I will shoot through all those activities, individuals and teams. 2 is send me some tiny habit tips. And if you want those on anchor moments and celebrations and this little recipe, we can send that through as well. 3 was any other research or resources I mentioned. So there's something I said like James Prochaska's work or the study we've done in Australia or that you want. If you put that in an email, again, we will over the next 24 hours get all of those things out for you. So again, you know, I'm going to leave you with this thought, and then again, happy to take any questions that are popping up there. I love this idea from BJ, and it kind of goes back to what Peggy suggested about us helping to become more active and intelligent stewards of our well-being, is that we need to be able to embrace mistakes and discoveries and use them to move forward. You know, often when I try a tiny habit, the first time out of the gate, sometimes it lands beautifully, other times it needs tweaking. My anchor moment's not right, my celebration feels a bit too dorky and not enjoyable enough. Sometimes the habit's too small and I need to build it up. Sometimes I realize I thought I'd really love doing that, but when I tried it, I didn't enjoy it at all. So just remember again, being intelligent and active stewards of our well-being means that we keep experimenting. We see ourselves as a living science experiment. We see our teams as living science experiments. And we get in them, we play. Play is actually how we are wired to learn and grow. And we don't worry so much about the outcome as we do about the learning and the growth that's coming along that journey. So I hope that this has been useful for you. Again, this is the PERMAH survey site where you can take that free 5-minute survey. And I'm just going to scroll back through with our last few minutes together and have a look at some of these questions and see if there's anything I've missed and anything else I can point you towards. So Kristen, you wanted some strategies for yourself, but that you can share with your colleagues. So hopefully we've done that. Again, this PERMAH survey, try it yourselves. You get quite a detailed report. And so it's completely free. It helps us continue to learn about what supports wellbeing in the world. And so this can be a great one to do. But again, Kristen, email me for the little cheat sheets and I'll send those through for you as well, which should be helpful. Ellie was saying, hoping to learn strategies for myself, but also to share with my colleagues and community. Will the recording of the session be shared? I don't know. I need to check that with the MAPP guys. I'm certainly happy for it to be shared, Ellie. If not, again, there's a ton. We have a podcast called Making Positive Psychology Work, and there is a ton of free resources on there and podcasts from many of these researchers that I've spoken about today. Let me stop the share on that and then come back to you. Okay, what else have we got there? Michelle is saying how to encourage best health strategies for employees. So again, I think, Michelle, the tiny habit bit as well as PERMAH is a great way to think about it. But if you're thinking more physical health stuff in particular, again, I think BJ has a lot on the tiny habit stuff. Health is where he really started his research, but I also love Tom Rath's work. And again, people can go through, take a free survey on his site and get a little personal 30-day health plan. So if you're wanting more on the physical health front, I think that's a great resource. Lisa's saying, hoping to learn how I can use my strengths for my own wellbeing and engagement and empower others to do the same during this time. So we touched on strengths a bit, Lisa. Sometimes I like to supercharge people's tiny habits, but in that routine part, I get them to add, I'm going to jump back on there for a second, I get them to add in on this part of the recipe. Here, I will, down the bottom, oh, go back, forward. On the bottom, I put, and the strength I will use is. So if they've done things like the VIA survey or Strengths Profiler or Gallup Strengths Finder, I find that can be a good way to remind them to align their strength to the habit. So hopefully they're feeling a little more motivated and confident to tackle it. So hopefully that might help a little bit on that front for you too, Lisa. Janet's saying, hey from London, hey Janet, would love to hear some tips on how to help the helpers, supporting my HR colleagues who are on the front line dealing with challenging issues in the organisations. I think this is so important, Janet, not least in the research we just did in Australia. We found that HR teams were the least likely people employees would often turn to for support, but They were the most effective people in helping us improve our sense of ability and confidence and motivation to care for our well-being. So the more we can help HR teams understand how they care for themselves and teams, the better I think they can be in providing that support to others. So Janet, I would suggest even just taking some of those ideas and even having like a little, well-being check-in, maybe once a week at the moment. You could share a different pillar. Hey, today we're going to talk about positive emotion, and get them together to create a tiny habit. Go off and try it for the week, support each other. The next week, check in, how did they go? Add the next pillar, check in with the next time, build the next tiny habit. And we are actually already rolling that kind of training out for a lot of workplaces, not just HR teams, but whole organizations in Australia right now, because they're all feeling that need about how do they care for each other. So hopefully that's helpful, Janet, on that front. Actually, we did just this research report we did in Australia on the 1,000 employees. We did with the Australian HR Institute. And so they popped a whole lot of HR questions in there through that report. And so again, if you want that report, just email me and I'll send that through for you. It might be useful as well. Jackie, how to manage being a new hire and working from home. That's hard, right? Because you don't have the relationships with the team before you've probably been sent home very well developed, and suddenly you're scrambling. I would encourage the team to be having a one-on-one check-in with that new hire. So all team members maybe sprinkle it over, some days. It doesn't have to be every day, maybe one every second day, where a team member is just calling for, could be just 15 minutes, like check in and chat, or a 30-minute virtual cuppa together, and just getting to know each other. We need some of that just social time to connect that's not always task focused. And one of the challenges right now is that because everybody's feeling overwhelmed, a lot of that just social connection time has disappeared and we've gotten way too task heavy. So I would suggest, just like we would in the office, right? We might align them to work with different people, or teams might take them for a lunch or a coffee to get to know each other. I'd be encouraging that. It just might need a little more deliberate support around it than what we are able to organically do when we're in proximity with each other. So there was all the questions. Can we have my PowerPoint? You can absolutely have my PowerPoint. Again, if you want to email me there at shell@michellemcquaid.com, we will get all that out over the next 24 hours for you. As always, we say, steal these materials with pride if you feel it can help anybody's well-being in the world. We truly believe the need is more than any one of us can reach alone. And so this is useful for you to do that. That would make my heart sing with joy and make this hour very well spent. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and hello from Bermuda. We're about 2 minutes from wrapping out, so if anybody's got any last questions, this is your chance to pop them into that chat window. Otherwise, I will be wishing you all well. And again, if you visit our site, michellemcquaid.com, you'll find there is no shortage of lots and lots of free resources and podcast interviews and cheat sheets with many of the leading researchers in this space that we've been touching on today, and surveys and more stuff than we'll get you through for the rest of the year, I'm sure. Awesome, Ali. Very happy to do it for you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Ben. Have a great day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining me, and take care. Be well, everybody. Bye.